blah, 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 blah.
Welcome to the Our Forever Smiles podcast, a podcast created to support mothers of children who were born with clefts and those who love them. I'm your host, Laura Arroyo, and I'm also a mother of a daughter who was born with a surprise cleft palate. I know the challenges you face every day. Whether you have just learned the difficult news of your baby's cleft lip or palate, you're in the midst of pre-op or post-op, or you're an OG cleft mom, this podcast is for you. In a weekly conversation, we will talk about everything from feeding and speech therapy to surgery and school. We'll share tips from guest experts and advocates and even share a little joy in the process. You can listen to Our Forever Smiles wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. Hello, everyone. Sorry to interrupt, but I need a little bit of help. If you're listening to this on the Apple Podcast app or YouTube, you may see a follow plus sign or a subscribe button. If you're able to, it would mean the world to me if you could follow or subscribe. That's the best way to support this show. If you subscribe, I'm able to show it to potential guests or different brands. It helps to grow the show and reach more communities to continue building awareness about the cleft lip and palate journey on a global scale. Thank you so much. Back to the conversation. Hello, and welcome back to the Our Forever Smiles Cleft Mom Diaries and Support podcast. I am Laura Arroyo. Before we jump into this episode, I would like to invite you to join this community to hear conversations with other cleft moms and advocates that will help you feel supported along your journey. All I want you to do is click on the Facebook group page that is linked in the episode notes. You can speak directly to the guests from this podcast, ask questions, and talk to a community of cleft moms that are eager for answers, but also willing to help. As a note, we are not medical doctors, and we do not intend for you to use the information that we share here as medical advice. We are parents and advocates who love our children, and we are sharing our own personal experiences. I have so much in common with our guest here today. Anne Giocondini-Rodriguez is a system administrator in the IT world. She is a current ESL volunteer, a former high school English teacher, and first-time mom. So the things that I have in common with Anne are both of our babies are born with a cleft palate only. I also went to school. I am not an English teacher, and I have never been an English teacher, but that is what I went to college for. And I was also a first-time mom when I was received my diagnosis.
Cool.
So welcome, Anne.
Thank you.
Let's take it back from all the way to the beginning. So were you planning a pregnancy? Was this something that kind of came as a surprise, or were you all just like family planning when you first started?
We were family planning in that we were planning to get pregnant when I got pregnant. This is my only child, my first child. But we didn't know when it was going to happen. We just pulled the goalie and said, okay, because some people it takes months. Sometimes it takes a few cycles and whatnot. And for us, it was like right away. So it was like within 4 weeks, I was like, feel like heartburn all day, every day for a week. And I was like, I don't ever get heartburn. So I was like, let's see if I'm pregnant. So I was surprised a little bit just because it was like, oh, I'm pregnant. But we were planning on it. So
Yeah.
for the most part.
Sometimes it happens like quicker than you think. It's like you start, okay, let's think about it. And then it's like, wait, I'm pregnant.
Yeah, I was really surprised because every single friend I have, it's 3 months, 6 months. Like you start, but then you never know with lining up timing and stuff. We got really fortunate right away.
So whenever you like officially found out that you were pregnant, did you have a quote unquote normal pregnancy?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. I always say it's funny because my pregnancy was super easy. Throughout the entire thing, every checkup was like normal. I'd even have the cleft palate show up on the ultrasound. So I had no idea until the day of delivery that he had a split palate. So yeah, no indications, no weird genetic tests. Like everything seemed pretty normal. But the delivery was a little bit difficult. And obviously most everybody's delivery is going to be in some sort, some way, I think. But so I had a C-section. And then when he got delivered, like an emergency C-section, he was full term, but they saw it right away when he cried and everything. So it was a surprise because I had no preparation whatsoever for the cleft diagnosis because I had no idea that it was there.
Yeah. Did you, during your pregnancy, did you do like the NIPT testing and all that stuff? So you were able to find out like the gender of the baby before. How many ultrasounds did you have?
That's a good question. At least, I want to say 4. I think there was like one in-depth anatomy one where you got to see the different facial features, but then they did a second one because he's like hiding his face a little bit. And then it was just the regular, more not in-depth like anatomy ones, just the regular ultrasounds where they can just see where he's at and like the heartbeat and all that. So I had a few, I guess it's the standard. I never had anything extra or special in terms of we need to see extra scans or anything because they never saw any abnormalities at all. So
yeah, it was the same. I've actually spoken to other cleft moms as well, and I mentioned to them that I actually only had 3 ultrasounds, and they're like, "Oh my goodness, like I had like 50," and
yeah. Yeah, I had like 3 or 4. It's like, it's just like, okay, cool.
And I always, of course, it's a blessing to be able to have a normal pregnancy and to not have anything to worry about during your pregnancy because it's such a time where you're like the most vulnerable, the most, I don't know. I felt like outside of myself, I consider myself to be like a very strong person. And I don't know, when I got pregnant, I felt like you could blow on me and I would like, fall over or like, or you could like just have a slight tone and I just like burst into tears. And that's not like me.
Yeah, hormones are crazy. Yeah. It's you become a whole different person almost. Yeah.
So it's
insane.
I was a little bit,
It's a wild ride.
Yeah, I was a little bit jealous of people that got to see their baby a little bit more because it's like I wanted to see her more, but it's the blessing of having, you don't really need to see her all the time. So,
yeah. Yep.
And stuff.
Every ultrasound too, you're like, oh, what's next? But you're also nervous, obviously, for anything that they could find. So it's just a whole bag of like up and down feelings every time.
Yeah.
And especially as a first time mom too.
Yeah. I think that is like where my excitement came in. Like I wanted to have more ultrasounds. I wanted to see her more, but I was, just making sure that she was okay. And to talk about my story all day long is the reason I started a podcast. But and so what was the reason they decided to schedule you for a C-section?
I guess it's failure to descend. So I was pushing for 3 hours. I had, was it membrane sweep? I think it's called. Yeah. Like the Monday of that week. And that was full term. And they were like, oh, whenever you feel like it, do you want to just start the process? And I was like, sure. And then I felt like passive labor all through that afternoon into Tuesday, into Wednesday. And so for 3 days, I was definitely in passive labor. I don't know what you call it, but maybe not exactly pushing yet, but like contractions were getting more increased and a lot of pain. And then he was just malpositioned towards the end. So when they finally admitted me like 2 days later, I was like dying. I felt like I was dying. But like I got admitted, got the epidural. So I did that whole route and I felt way better. But when it came to pushing, it was like the last 3 hours, they were like, okay, it's time to push. You're open enough to push. And he just would, like, every time I push, I could feel him pushing out, but then he would suck back in. And I think he was stuck, technically. I think it was a failure descent and he was stuck, somewhat malposition. And like when even the C-section, I'm out of it. But my husband said that he remembers the surgeon going, whoa, we really had to get him out of there, tuck him out or pull him out because maybe he was also a little bit big. He was like 8 pounds, 2 ounces or something. So he's a little bit larger. Maybe if he was just like a pound less, maybe it'd be different. But I just would not come out. He wanted to stay in my womb. He was like, I want to stay with mom.
Yeah.
Stay in here. It's nice and warm.
Yeah. Did you feel any like disappointment or anything having to have like a C-section? I know sometimes there's, especially being in labor, or were you at the point where you're like, get the baby out of me?
It was that point. Yeah, I was so exhausted. It was one of the most exhausting things in my entire life. At that point, yeah, because I had done everything. I had tried different positions. They were like, even the doctors felt really bad for me because they're like, you've done everything you can to get this kid out. And I think at that point too was emergency C-section because I think my blood pressure was going through the roof and something with him. So they were like, we need to put you first in line to get him out. Yeah, no, it's a weird identity because you're like, yeah, you're like a little upset that you may not have delivered. But I also think about I'm very thankful for modern medicine because I'm healthy and happy and he's good. Because if this was 100 years ago or 200 years ago where there weren't C-sections, I would probably passed away and him too if he wasn't able to come out. So I think on the flip side, it was meant to happen the way it was meant to happen. And I'm very thankful for his care team, like the maternity team at U of M were great. So for everything that we had to go through. So yeah.
I think, yeah, you're right. When you do think about it in that way, it is, you're just happy to be healthy and to have a healthy baby to bring him on his side. Yeah. So you mentioned they found it immediately when he started crying. Who saw it first and how did they bring that up to you?
I was really doped up. So I think they told it to us together because I was like, we got to hold him right away. So I think they gave my husband him for the first second, but then come to me in the same moment because in the C-section we're like together right there at the table. I think we found out the same time, me and my husband, and it was right away because I just remember they had said right as they were coming around the corner. And then they emphasized that a little bit more too when we finally got admitted and we're like staying the night and stuff. And he's in his little incubator. I call it incubator, but their little box or whatever. They had doctors coming in and talking to us about what that means. Like they even have at Mott's at University of Michigan, they have a surgeon who actually comes and evaluates it right there and then to see if it might even be something that they would operate on in the future. And they also have pediatricians, they have speech pathologists, they have lactation consultants. Maybe that's the normal round of people in some regard to maybe, I don't know if that's like everybody gets delivered there. They just have a team. But I know, especially because of his cleft and his feeding issues, they had extra doctors there to consult me, consult my husband Joe, and like put their fingers like to look at it and stuff too.
Yeah. How much time was it between the time that you delivered and like when a doctor came to see you?
Within probably the next day, because I had to recover from a little bit from the C-section and stuff. And I think that was at like 6 in the morning. So I would say at the same, like in the evening of the same day they came. Maybe it's all foggy. Maybe I'm thinking, because we were also there. Some people deliver and they're like in the hospital for 1 or 2 days and then they're out. But we did have to stay the whole week because of 2 things, because of the feeding, because they had to make sure he was eating and feeding because he couldn't breastfeed right away because of the lack of suction. And then, so they were concerned about that with him. And then we also had an infection. And I think that was part of why I had to have a C-section because I must have got an infection while I was there. And so they had to test him to make sure he wasn't sick with it, with the bacteria. And they did like live cultures and had like pediatricians and other doctors come in and test him while recovering from the C-section. So I think there's like a compound of a few things all happening at the same time. So my timeline in my head's a kind of a little bit, probably a little skewed because maybe the surgeon came 3 days later. Maybe it was the second day. I don't know, because it was just an onslaught of doctors for me and him.
Yeah.
But it was all within that first week that we were there that we found, there was a lot of information. I think that's one of the most kind of overwhelming things is that if they're, I don't know, other practitioners, but like they can give you a lot and you just had a baby. So you're just trying to recover yourself mentally too, going through the roller coaster of hormones.
Yeah, for sure. And I understand that as well because I also feel like my timeline is all like a blur. And also I do deliver vaginally and even still like not, I guess like the epidural and just not being able to sleep and then being given this big news that you don't quite really understand just yet and all this stuff. And so I have a little bit of a blur like about really what time and what days people came to see me. But I do remember in the beginning, our struggle was feeding. And the reason I asked about when they came to see him is because I wondered, I'm curious what you all did in that time before the doctors came to tell you exactly what that means, or that helping you with the realization that there is no suction and so you're not going to be able to breastfeed. Because I know when I was first delivered, the nurses were encouraging me to breastfeed. So they didn't even know
Yeah,
what that
same.
meant.
That's so true. Yeah, that was actually really frustrating. I had the exact same experience where they even had a lactation consultant, one or two. And even then, they were all like really enforcing the breastfeeding part. And I felt like a horrible mom because I'm sitting there, my baby's crying. I can't breastfeed. I'm crying. And so, like, it was probably one of the worst initial experiences with the cleft palate because it's like you feel like a failure almost because you don't understand why you can't breastfeed. And no one said anything specifically that way. So even though the surgeon came in, and I remember, like I said, he came in and he just, his input was, oh, it's so narrow. I wouldn't even do a procedure in the future. But that's obviously not, I don't say obviously because you don't know, but later down the road, he did get a surgery and get repaired. So there's different opinions, but I just remember from him specifically, that's all he gave us. And then from every other nurse, like you said, was like trying to position him in the right place and like, you need to feed him. And so we gave him bottles right away too. But I just remember that first night crying because he's crying, I'm crying, we're both exhausted and I couldn't feed him. But now I look back and I see, oh, it was obviously because of the suction, but no one spelled that out for me. Because I don't think those nurses, for as much as they know and are aware, I don't know how often they do have a cleft team in that hospital, but I don't know how often they interact with that scenario. So I don't know if it was just that experience, but
Yeah.
with that team, so I totally understand what you mean. Yeah, that struggle.
Yeah. And the transfer of knowledge as well. And I think that one of the things that I think I struggled with is because the cleft is not visible. It's like a constant,
Yes, it's totally different.
having to remind people and like actually helping them. Once you've learned the gravity or the like severity of it, or even like the proper protocol, you spend a lot of your time like having to teach people and go through all these things and like, talk about all these things, even to
That's true.
medical professionals,
because it's like invisible. Yeah.
that you know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you become your own, you become your child's advocate, which is a beautiful blessing in a way, but at the same time, you become your own, it's like you almost become your own doctor for your kid because you have to know all this stuff. And that's not even pertaining to the surgeries and all that future things. Yeah.
And so when you were finally able to go home, did you feel prepared, or what was?
No, I think, how prepared do you feel? I think as a first time mom, especially, nothing. I think in some regard, I think you can do as much research as you want and you can in life, but nothing's going to prepare you to some extent to the experience of the reality of your kid needing you and the lack of sleep that you get and having to abide by that. But like, I definitely think there was definitely more a struggle that I wasn't prepared for because of that extra pumping need. And long down 4 months later, I actually was able to breastfeed him when I don't know if it's because his mouth got bigger or his suction got stronger. And this was before he had his surgery. So I was very thankful because that first 4 months I could not breastfeed and I had to pump. And I think that was honestly the most exhausting thing ever. Is everyone, if you've done this before, you know the cycle where it's like they have to feed every 2 hours and then you're already concerned about their weight because they're cleft kids. So their weight management is like an extra concern. And so then you're like, okay, I'm feeding them every 2 hours. I have to clean I have to pump. I have to clean my bottles. Then it's by the time you're done, they feed again. So you really never get a break unless you have someone else cleaning stuff. But yeah, I think it's just that time, that demand was so overwhelming. And then when he finally latched the day that I just tried again with the boob and he latched and he drank and I was like, oh, and I know not every parent has that. So I do feel for that. But I was like, oh my gosh, this makes it so much easier because now I can just put him on my boob and boom, done. And so it took half of that struggle away.
Yeah.
And that was my biggest thing, I think, for me, was I realized was that demand. Because it also ties into the anxiety, right? As a mom, you're like, is he getting enough? Is he feeding enough? You're measuring. You're always like, he has 2 ounces. And then you have all these check-ins with your doctor, even if they're just normally developing, you still have all these check-ins. Every kid kind of has all those preemptive doctor appointments. But even with the cleft specifically, I think you even have extra concerns because he's always underweight as well. And I see that a lot in our forums with the cleft moms with, is my kid's underweight, my kid's underweight. And so there's all that. I'm still dealing with that now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned anxiety. Do you feel like you were able to enjoy those newborn months?
I enjoy his toddler years, I'll be honest, now way more than the first months because of the anxiety. Yeah. I think I did somewhat, I tried to be purposeful and be like present in the moment. But I think now that I look back, it was definitely a cloud of like postpartum anxiety. I wouldn't say depression, sometimes even anxiety with those hormones and stuff, they still stick around for a while. And it definitely, my enjoyment of him every day is totally different. Like right now, he could even have a temper tantrum, and I'm like, oh, what a silly kid. It's like I understand where he's coming from. I can parent it, but like I just remember those first 2 months. It was like I just felt paralyzed. Like I'm like, oh, it's like the anxiety and probably lack of sleep was, I'm sure, a huge thing, a huge fact. So, but not really. I think if I look back, I've seen other friends, they have kids and their kids everyone I think has something. Everybody has some issue, whether it's with their own health or their kid, or they're tackling something or just figuring out to be a new mom and new parent. But I definitely look at some of my friends who I feel like they seem like they take it with a grain of salt, but they seem like they're going through a smoother transition than I did initially. But I try not to compare myself too much. I think what my journey is what my journey was.
Yeah.
But
I felt like that for a long time. Like even sometimes when I talk about it, I get like this tightness like in my chest. And people have asked me like, did I have postpartum depression? And I say, no, I would actually describe it more as anxiety. Like I had so much worry all the time. And it's, you're just and also the lack of sleep because you're just watching them to make sure that they're breathing.
It's
make
so
sure
true.
that they're like up, and then you're tired, and then of course the pumping,
it's just constant,
and it's just so much. But I think that is fascinating that you were able to eventually be able to breastfeed. So was his palate just very small, or how were you able to get that to work out?
I think compared to other people I see online, his is more narrow for sure. I know you asked for pictures, but I don't even know if I have a picture of his split palate. They're probably like really grainy, like curry, and send this to the doctor picture. But yeah, no, I got really lucky in that regard because it is so narrow. Because even our surgeon said that he was like, oh, this is probably one of the easiest surgeries I'll have. And I'm like, okay, cool. So he must have been lucky enough that as he got a little bit bigger and maybe he was able to like just suction better. I really don't have any scientific understanding of why he was all suddenly able to just latch, because it was initially like, I don't care what you, like I even saw lactation consultants in Ann Arbor. They have an organization that's just purely dedicated for breastfeeding. And even then, they even said, even though my doctors at U of M eventually, once he was out of the hospital, they were like, yeah, he won't be able to breastfeed. Once I actually had consultations like months down later, like maybe a month after, and they were like talking about more of the abnormality and the structure of his mouth. This was with the craniofacial team. So when who are the experts, are saying that you won't be able to breastfeed, actually the lip part, if that was involved, that would be better because you can create a suction and fill the gap. With the split palates, you probably won't be able to. It's funny. They said I wouldn't. But then when I went to the Ann Arbor consultants separately, because my insurance covered it, and I figured try every resource I can, they were like, yeah, I think we can. They watched you breastfeed, and they're like, I think we can get him to do it. And then it was almost like I kept telling them, no, I don't think so. I don't think my doctors say they won't. He does it. He cries. It's like a kind of a painful experience every time I try. And then one time I just tried and he did. And so I was like, oh, like it was just such a relief. And he still breastfeeds. He's 2.5. I give myself 2 years from 4 months to let him breastfeed, and then we'll probably be done. But yeah, now it's no problem.
Yeah.
And that was before surgery. I don't know.
Do you recommend that mothers try? So I'll just be like transparent about it. I don't want mothers to have the same experience that I have, right? Because I think that your experience is like so unique. And so I got my sign out saying, feed your baby. Don't make them struggle trying to I don't know. Sometimes I feel like it's you're trying to fulfill
To
your
force
own
it.
need to want to do something.
Yeah.
And it's
Yes.
somewhat,
I totally understand what you're saying.
yeah.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying because I understand the pressure that like you said, the initial nurses were like, you just need to breastfeed and you just don't know what you're doing, which also you don't in a way. So yeah, you're like, oh my God, it's my fault. I don't know what I'm doing, but they didn't really take in consideration the anatomy of your child because they just are probably busy and there's many kids. And so I think you're right. I think you get stuck on this idea that I'm supposed to breastfeed or I'm supposed to be doing it this way. And ultimately, it's however a kid is getting fed is what's important, right? So if it is all bottle fed for majority of their life or their beginning years, it's okay. We're all going to have different journeys on that. And I agree with you when I read like on Facebook, I think mine was a little bit unique scenario where he did end up latching, which I don't think is the majority of the case with this, especially with this. I think majority of the time you're going to find that it is going to be bottle fed, which then takes its own training and figuring out like what bottles work and like the flow of the discs inside and all that and the milk and the formula and the whatever works, what you need. That's a whole research thing in itself, right? That's all part of the learning experience. But I think that is a good piece of advice that you're getting towards, which is don't pressure yourself or don't feel like you have to do that breastfeed. Because even my friends who have like kids who don't have cleft palates, they said their doctor's kind of pushing them. My friend has a heart condition, which she thinks is related to breastfeeding, and it like exacerbates his heart condition. And the doctor's like, you should still continue to breastfeed. And she's like, I don't feel comfortable for my own health to actually do this. I want to get off this train and maybe switch gears. There's like a weird push because there are a lot of benefits to that milk. And I get that. But I think we have all the resources to be able to do what's right for both you and your kid, right? And especially the mom too. I think that sometimes we get forgotten a little bit behind everything that's focused on your child, especially if they have special needs in that regard. A lot of people stop breastfeeding because they have to go back to work and stuff like that. So, yeah.
What are you using
I think
for bottles in the beginning, whenever you're pumping?
Was it Dr. Brown?
Yeah.
Brown? Right? Yep. Yeah. And the blue discs are hard to find. I know that struggle, but yeah, I use those the whole time.
Yeah. My daughter actually, she used the pigeon bottle because the Dr. Brown's was a little bit slower flow for her. And I don't know, I laugh at myself now. I actually couldn't, I don't know whether I couldn't get it to work or what, but it would work when we were when we were in front of the feeding therapist, and then I would get home and I couldn't get the milk out. And I was just like, I can't be frustrated. Like it's already like really stressful and stuff. And how were in the beginning, of course, like how were you able to tackle all of your appointments? Were you someone that scheduled everything right away as soon as you knew, or were you like slow rolling the process?
The nice thing with U of M is, and I'm very thankful for their system that they have set up, and I don't think every hospital is the same way, is that they do a lot of, they couple your appointments together. So even now, post like it's been a year since he had his surgery, I still will go see like a follow-up with his surgeon, but then they'll do a speech pathologist appointment right after. So it's, even if you're seeing multiple doctors in the discipline, they have the scheduling like done right there, right next to each other, because they're in the same area. Like even I think his auditory is like in the same, if maybe one floor difference. A lot of times, at that time, the U of M does a lot for you where they'll just get all your doctors and line it up right away. And so you have months in advance, even knowing what you need to book. Now with the pediatrician, that's different. Obviously, that's not related. We have a pediatrician in a different hospital. I think that I just booked as they recommend with the standard care or whatever, and whatever she wanted at the time. So yeah, I did everything ahead of time. But that's, again, because U of M kind of hands that to you, which is very nice. They book everything before you leave the door, which I'm very thankful for, because that's not the case, I don't think, in every place.
Yeah. What did you do like to prepare for surgery?
For surgery, what I wish I listened to a little bit more than I didn't was one of the things is, and I see this a lot on our Facebook forums, and I think this is it hits home for me, is that the doctors will always say, if your kid's sick, we're not going to do surgery. And then you're like, oh, but I've had this appointment for months and it's such a big deal. And he has just a runny nose, or he or she has a runny nose. So they still do the appointment and then they consult and see you. And in our case, we did everything that the surgeons expected. Like he started a little bit of, I think it was liquids and soft foods at the time that he could eat, and he breastfed and had formula. And I think if there was anything specific for the split that we had to do outside of our like normal routine, but I know that the biggest concern was like, if he's sick, we're going to reschedule. And the day of surgery, he got a runny nose. I swear, I'm not even like trying to lie and say like, oh yeah, he was sick for the week and I still want the surgery. No, it was the morning of. And I'm like, okay. But for the most part, he was still, and they like checked him out and they had him in his diaper and they did little scans and stuff. And then they cleared him, but he actually ended up having breathing issues after surgery, which meant he got admitted for another week on a breathing tube. And I asked the surgeon, which was a whole different story in itself and like scary journey. But I asked the surgeon, was like, could that have been because of he came in with a respiratory? And he's like, it could be. He didn't want to admit it, but it could be, could not be, could be something else. It's hard to say. But I remember even in his chart, like the person who will check is the person who puts you under, the anesthesiologist. She even cleared him. She said runny nose, but like the airway sounded okay. And the airway was clear. And so they weren't concerned with if there was a respiratory thing, if it would affect him. But I still wonder if it was part of the reason why surgery had some issues. So I do take that to heart. If people are like, oh, if my kid has already, I'm like, be safe and reschedule. Don't take that chance. Because especially with like children, toddlers specifically, when they have surgery or medical concerns and stuff, usually the ICU team says it's usually breathing. It's always centered around breathing is like their biggest, if they have problems, it's usually that because their airways are so small. So I just don't chance it. But I don't say anything on Facebook when people say stuff. I just take it to heart. That's my experience I had. But
yeah. How old was he when he had his surgery?
Almost 1 year old. So I think a month shy of being 1 year old.
Giselle was 10 months, and I just remember it being, you're right. It's like you have this appointment that you've been waiting for like their entire life. And then you like just builds up, I don't know, you build up to this moment where you feel like, I guess I wrote something about it, and it's you feel like your child is finally going to be whole. Like so you're waiting for this day. And so, of course, when they say, no, canceled, it's heart crushing. Like and then who knows? Some of these hospital systems are so busy, and depending on how they're able to get you scheduled back in, it's like another month or 2 or 6
could be months. Yeah.
Waiting again. It's just heartbreaking. So, but
I like that perspective that you shared, though, that you're like, I didn't think about that, where you have your hope tied into this, where it's like the biggest hurdle. I'm going to get over this hurdle. And of course, other families have multiple surgeries. It might be multiple, but from a split palate perspective, it's, we're thinking like the one big repair. And it's like, because from the start, I love that when you said that, it's like you wait your whole life, their whole life. Because at that point is their whole, that you've been waiting to hopefully get over that hurdle.
Yeah.
I
have I asked you about the anxiety and stuff. I look back and I wish that I didn't necessarily feel like I was waiting like for her life to start in a way. It's one of those things that like I really wish I could have enjoyed her more. And I just like what you said as well. Like I nodded with that. I knew that this would happen. And so in those moments, I would try to be as present as I could be and like really hold her so close and just be like, let me like cherish these like little snuggles. But even now I still feel like, I didn't do it enough, or I didn't take enough pictures. I didn't, just like you, I may have one picture of Giselle's palate. Sometimes I'm like thinking, of course, I hope nobody would think that I'm like lying or anything. But sometimes I'm like, do these people probably don't even think I'm like a Cleft mom for real, because I
You almost also feel that way too, and having, at least from a split only, like you're not having the full experience in a way, which just sounds weird too, because I totally understand that, where I totally understand that, where you're like, our kid has, but because I think you said earlier, and I think I wrote on my form, like it's a different perspective when your kid also has a hidden disability, where it just puts you in a different mindset and how you have to communicate to people and how you relate to people, even in that same community of cleft palates. Though it's not like I wish to have a different experience, or one's better, not one's better, worse than the other. There's no morality tied to that, but I totally understand what you're saying. That I resonate with that.
Yeah. You want your experience to be validated because it was so hard. It was so
hard. People don't get it unless they're in it.
So you go through this whole thing where you're like, I went through a lot, and it's not, you're hard, but it was hard. And I've shared this countless times before. Listeners are probably going to get so tired of me saying this. I always go back and forth of, okay, if it was just lip, then it's a repair, and maybe my baby would have had suction. There's advantages and disadvantages of both. And I think sometimes when you think of the lip, people are, of course, it's functional as well, but it's more, I don't like using the word cosmetic, because there is some functional use of having the repair if it's just lip. But palate is so much more about quality of life, like feeding and speech and
speech,
sort of thing. I don't know. Advantages and disadvantages of both, but everyone's heart is different.
I like that. Everyone's heart is different. Yep.
Yeah.
That's true.
And so after surgery, you mentioned, so you're still breastfeeding. And so how were you, this is like almost like a two-part question. So how was recovery, and how were you able to continue to breastfeed through that?
So recovery, and again, mine's a little more difficult just because my heart was a little different and I don't want to scare people, because I think your kid's going through a surgery, and that's the most terrifying thing, especially when you're like, okay, bye, and you put your hand into someone else's, or your kid's into a doctor's hands, and you trust that everything's going to go well. And so for me, I don't want to scare people, because it's so many good examples, so many good stories, so many good journeys that vary from how easy or difficult, and a lot of it similar. I think you see a lot of the same pain management concerns and the feeding concerns afterwards. But I had the extra component of him like not being able to breathe. So when he went through surgery, the doctor was like, yep, surgery was great. He also got the ear tubes. So they were like, yep, they did that within the first few minutes. That went fine. And we got a few check-ins. They were like, oh, you can see your kid in a little bit. And we're like waiting, like 45 minutes. And we're still in the waiting room. But I'm telling my husband, Joe, like, I don't know, something's wrong. And I can see them doing tests too. We get like instant results. And I'm like, I don't think it's just like us going to see him recover. There's something, and I demanded to talk to someone, because I'm like, we've been sitting here for an hour after he said everything went well. And then, but what I found out was when they walked us back, and they had a social worker, that even though he came out of surgery, like he then stopped breathing as he was coming out of the anesthesiologist's medication and stuff. And so they had to hurry and put him back under. And then he had to be on a breathing tube for at least progressively for at least another day or two. And then we ended up taking less and less air support off, and like he could breathe better. But that whole journey in itself was scary because he couldn't breathe. So we ended up where some parents will have the surgery and then they'll have 1 or 2 days and then they'll go home, because it's mostly just the pain management and taking out the stitchers. For him, he had to be on that breathing tube. And that, of course, you never want to see your kid on a breathing tube. I think that was probably one of the worst experiences. And then even when he was on the breathing tube, he coded as well. So like the first night that we stayed the night in the hospital, I felt bad because I was like, told my husband, I was like, okay, everything's good. We're in the IC. He's 10 months, just had surgery the day before. And he's like on the breathing tube, but he's just in the hospital. And then I was like, go get our pillows, because we know we're going to stay the night, obviously. And as soon as my husband leaves the room and goes to the car, the parking garage, he codes and the numbers go down on the screen. His breathing respiratory goes down, and the nurses rush in and they like bag him and everything. And I'm like, yeah. So I just stood there and decided to watch him stop breathing again. But I will say, like with the nurses, they were so good at communicating what exactly was happening step by step and exactly what was going on with him. Because one of the things with the tube in his chest, or like down his esophagus, is that when they start to wake up, they stress out because they can feel it. And then they clench. And I guess with babies, they clench it and then they stop breathing. And so it's a cycle. So they have to keep putting more sedation, more meds for him. So they had to up his meds. And so that he would just be out until they could get that breathing. And get him kind of the steroids working and being able to heal and be able to use more of his breathing later down the road. So that first day in the hospital was the scariest because I never stopped looking at him. I stared at him. I never went to bed. I would never stop watching the monitor. So I totally understand the anxiety of where you're like always wondering if your kid's breathing even when you're at home. But I had that extra part of that recovery because I did watch him stop breathing. Yeah. So he was in the hospital for at least a day fully on the tube. And then the next day they were going to pull it out and then see they could test it and see if he could breathe better. And then he wasn't really consistent. So I had to go back onto it. And then later in the day, he got better and then he just had an air mask. So it was just different ways, or CPAP mask. So it's different ways that they give him air. And so then he was doing good on that. And then the next day they were able to take that off. And so he progressively obviously got better and he's a healthy and happy toddler without any issues now. But that was part of our recovery journey. That was the hardest. It was just because our surgery didn't go well, like perfectly. It went well, but there was some complications. So
yeah. I can't imagine, how did they get the tube with that fresh, like new...
They have they had two tubes through the nose. So there was a trumpet. They had like green, like big wire, and then it goes down their nose. But he also had that trumpet in his nose, but then later with the CPAP, that was in front of his face too.
And then were you, of course they probably had him like IV'd and stuff, but were you required to try to feed or give him anything in terms of like food?
No. They must have been having like stuff go through his IV and things because there was no way. That first day he had to be completely sedated because every time he woke up, he would clench and stop breathing. So there was no way he could even feed or be conscious while he was on the breathing because he was completely out. When people are on not the worst level, but like when they're completely intubated, that was him. Like I don't know if I didn't send you the picture, but I can send you a picture with him but then the next day as like he got better at breathing and they would take it out and test and see, but then they had just the airflow, then he could technically eat. And I'm trying to remember, it's so blurry because it was you go through that anxiety fog and I remember. And I didn't breastfeed. I know that because even if I think with his recovery, going back to the bigger question of like recovery, even that first week, if that breathing stuff wasn't a factor, they still can't suction with that surgery. So even after when he was finally home, he didn't breastfeed for like a full week at least. And he was like, you could tell it was frustrating because he's like, I want comfort and I want to be able to feed. And we had to go back to the bottle and just rely on the bottle. And then even on top of that, it was just like with a lot of people we've read on Facebook where they're in pain, so they don't want to eat. So then they don't take anything except for maybe a spoon or a syringe. And you're like just trying to get them to eat anything. And they're like, no, and they're too tired because their mouths hurt. I can imagine like your main component of eating hurts. So we definitely struggled just like everybody else with like, getting Pedialyte and trying to give them Pedialyte or trying to do a syringe just here and there and just doing little baby and a lot of applesauce, but no breastfeeding for it until he finally got to suction again. He just was able to suction once it like all healed up. So I kept pumping through that time. But yeah, pain management, giving him ibuprofen, Tylenol on and off and trying to, because I even felt bad that even after he recovered and went home, I didn't realize to what extent he probably still was in pain because I was like, oh, I don't have to give him this much medication anymore because he's happy, he's moving, he's playing, he's more of himself. And then you get you go backwards a little bit, I think, because you start to lessen up that stuff. And then you assume that they're healing more than they maybe are. I don't know if other people have had that experience.
That's what I always tell people. I'm like, continue to do your rotation or whatever the recommended is. I think it's 2 weeks after you stay on top of it, like every 4 hours, 4 to 6 hours. Just even if they look like they're fine, because it's really like the medicine is masking the pain. But if you don't stay on top of it, they're going to feel pain and they're going to regress. And because like I even show pictures and actually videos of just 2 days after repair, and she was just her normal self. And I'm like, but this was 2 days after. There's no way that she wasn't feeling any pain.
Yeah.
And so what do you think has been like the hardest part in your journey? You seem like I've had so many conversations with different people, and I've had moms that have come on here and they just like cry. It was like sometimes it's like the first time people have been able to share their story or just like
Mhm.
recounting these things. But you seem like a very optimistic person, a very like upbeat person. And so what do you
Mhm.
feel has been the most challenging part of your journey?
Um, I think it is like expectation versus reality. I think a lot of people can say that about just being a parent or any new journey that you're on, because you have so much advice from so many different people, and maybe Cleft, you have so many different doctors and different opinions. Like a pediatrician will say something, surgeon will say something. I even had 2 different surgeons say 2 different things. So you get so much advice, and then you have the internet in front of you too. So then you're Googling everything, and you like, even like with the genetic part of the testing, which was a big kind of sad component for me too, because we had the geneticist like look at space and say, space could be like, I don't see anything normal with your child, but or like that could indicate a genetic disorder, but this is what we're testing, what we're looking for. Don't Google these, but this is what we're looking for. And I'm like, I'm going to definitely Google those, because if my kid has that, I'm going to be like, oh my God, what do I have to prepare for? No. And so that was like, I look back and I have to tell myself to stop. Don't, in a way, like information's good, but in a way, your journey and your kid's journey is not going to be the same exact thing because they have a diagnosis that everybody else has. And it's not going to be the extreme of what you might see the worst case scenario you think is going to be. So it's like the anxiety piece where I think that was the hardest part. And I'm a very analytical person. So I analyze everything. You tell me something, I'm going to go research. I'm going to read about it. I'm going to talk to 10 people about it. I'm going to consult doctors. So I'm a very informed person, but I think almost maybe a little bit harmful to an extent. And I think like you said, go back and wish I had more of those moments where it's just like, he's going to progress the way he's going to progress. We're going to have other hurdles that we have no idea that might come down the road that you can't prepare for. And it is what it is. And you have so much more strength than you think you do as a mom. Especially, I think that's where I'm positive, because I'm on the other, a little bit, I feel like a little bit on the other side, because I've gone through the surgery, so I definitely have more of a perspective of the biggest parts of our difficulties were behind us. He's feeding well. There's no big concerns about any development things that maybe down the road, maybe when he's in school, maybe they'll find this or that or speech stuff. But as of right now, things are like, he's almost like a normal child. So that's where my positive kind of candor comes from, because it's like I can breathe. I can finally like enjoy my toddler. But if you ask me during my surgery, I'd have a different persona, I think, a different perspective. I'd be anxious and crying all the time. Or if it was when it was first happening, I'm sure I'm just repeating what you probably already know, but I'd be more of an anxious worry.
Yeah.
But it's just, some of it you gotta let go and just realize that the journey that is in front of you is like meant to happen. And you have so much strength and ability to combat that and be your kid's advocate and your own advocate for yourself and your family, that you don't realize until you come down the road and you look back and you go, oh my gosh, I went through all that. I did all those doctor appointments. I managed my schedule. I still worked. Not saying you have to work, but I did all this stuff that people don't even realize that you're going through. My kid is like, they have all the love and attention and care for that they need. Like, they're happy and healthy. Just knowing that you've done everything in your power to be the best mom and be the best person, I think the best thing in the end.
Yeah. He doesn't have any additional surgeries planned. Yeah.
No, I'm very lucky, because I know that I'm not blind to the idea that I know a lot of people have like bone graft surgeries, they have other things. So as of right now, they don't say that there's anything. And it seems like his like repair was really good, and that like he doesn't have any speech deficits or anything. He can say all the sounds. So I'm very thankful. You never know, that might not be the case. Maybe you will have to have more speech intervention when he gets older. But as of right now, it's like smooth. Yeah, smooth. I guess to go back to your question of what was the hardest, you're seeing your kid have issues. I think having your kid in pain and having the what ifs of there's something wrong. And then you're like, what does that mean? I guess is the hardest. I guess that's where all my root analysis comes into, because I'm trying to fix that problem. I'm trying to understand that. I want every tool and book to tell me everything I need to know to, I guess, an IT teacher person to fix this problem. And it's, you can have everything tell you in the world, but it won't, maybe sometimes it won't comfort you in a way. And that's sad, but that's probably the hardest.
Yeah. So are you planning on having more kids?
So that's part of the whole conundrum is, do I go through this again if it is a possibility? Oh my gosh. I've even had a psychic, my friend, I know people might not believe in that stuff, but I have a friend who we just find that interesting. I take it for a grain of salt. But I have a psychic that I will go see her because my friend wants to go see her. So I'll do a session with her. And she has said some cool things in the past about my son and my family that I likes. But this last time I saw her, and again, I'm like, yeah. But she's like, are you sure you don't want another kid? Because there's like a soul over here that really wants, they're like, it's now or never. And I'm like, so like me and my husband have both said, I'm also adopted. So I'm a big proponent of adoption. And so I'm like, I've always, even from day one, I was like, I don't know if I want to have my own kids. I don't want to go through all that drama, but I will adopt. Like I've always said, it's a whole different thing of it, maybe trauma, maybe not physically to your body. You're dealing with a developing human that's probably going to come with deficits and issues in itself. So that's a whole new parenting road there. And I'm ready to sign up for that. So I've always said I'm going to adopt because I know how that went with me. But then I love my husband so much. And I was like, I really want to have this cute little replication of him and me. And how cute would that be? So I got pregnant, and now I look back, I'm like, I don't want to physically go through that. And if there was a potential for a cleft palate, I know we'd be more prepared. I know we'd have the right teams. Like we'd be so much in a better place, but it's a lot. It's a lot to go through and like sign up for a second time in a way. So I'm like, am I mentally able to do that? I don't know. So we've both been going back and forth and saying we want siblings, but we don't know if we want to have that potentiality. And no one can tell you for sure until they're going to have one or not, until it happens. So we've said, no, we're not going to have biologically another one, but we would adopt for sure. But I don't know. I changed my mind. Maybe next year I'll still have a second one and then adopt. I don't know. I don't know. I'm also very bad at going back and forth in my head and going, yeah, it wasn't that bad. And then,
I'm the same way too. I'm like, I want another one, but we're done. But I guess just in a two-part question that I gave you, just in closing, is there anything that you like learned along this journey that you may take into your like next parenthood journey? What are some of those big life lessons that you feel like your son has taught you, or just going through his process has taught you?
Yeah, I think kids are there's two parts to that. I think by just having a kid and being adopted for me in my journey has brought up a little bit of trauma and how I parent my child. You start to see, oh, there's like little things that I do that I learned from my parents that I don't know. I got to look into and see why do I do that and how I respond to my child. To me, there's one extra component where it's like, he's taught me so much about myself that I never realized that a kid could do that because I've never had a kid. So it's been a beautiful experience in that regard where it's, oh man, that is a trigger for me. I am going to fly off the handle when that happens. I didn't realize I'd be so annoyed by that or so, what I mean, or something. Or like for me again, I analyze my development. I analyze his so much, but partly because I have been adopted and I was in an orphanage. So I always I think I look to him to be like, I'm doing this right. In a way, like I'm doing a full karmic circle where I'm going to be the best mom because I may not have had that at the beginning of my life. So what does that look like? And I have great parents now. I was adopted into a great family. So I still had a really good attachment, but I'm always analyzing attachment theory and like how when my kid has a temper tantrum, parts of the brain that are highlighted, okay, they're in this part and they can't analytically. I know I sound like a ridiculous person, but I just analyze a lot. So I love that part because that's part of my teaching background too. I just love humans. I love understanding the psychology behind them. He's like teaching me a lot about my own background, upbringing and like things that I might need to work on, which is really beautiful. I didn't expect that in that regard. But with this cleft palate journey, I think the best advice I would give, now if I had to do it over again, is what I was saying before, which is you're going to get so much information, so much of like people who may not know what they're talking about because they've never had a cleft, but they still have give you parent advice. You're going to get cleft advice. You're going to get everybody and your neighbor saying something about your child. So I think this is just advice for any parent where it's your kid the best. And even when everyone's like, yeah, they should be able to do this, it's your own journey and their journey. And so you just have to be okay and trust that it's meant to be the way it is and that you will get over the hurdles that you're going through, because there's no way you won't, I think. I feel like you know what I mean? It's going to be hard, but you'll come out on the other side, whether it's 3 surgeries later, 4 surgeries, 1 surgery, or even if you don't elect to do a surgery, you're going to come on the other side and realize I've done so much for my children, and you're going to be so proud of yourself. And you're just going to love them who they are. They're your child. So they're whatever way they are, they're your number one. So hopefully, I think no matter how they look or you're something so beautiful and loving about that, where it's like that relationship I've never had in my life. So I think that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And that cleft journey made it extra special in that regard. I've had people tell me that. I've had a psychic say that, because I've asked her, I'm like, why did my kid have a cleft? And just to be curious of what her answer was. And she's, oh, he chose this in his like soul contract. He chose this in his life because as a family, you guys needed somebody to have some extra, like it'll make him extra special to you guys. And we both have a little bit of attachment issues where we're standoffish as parents because we both have had difficult upbringings. So I think that makes sense for us, where it's like, oh yeah, I had to have a kid who needed extra attention and love and stuff because it cemented our relationship with them. And so I think that's almost a blessing that you can reverse. You know what I mean? You can I can look at my kid and say, oh, this was such I don't want to say defect. It sounds like so bad, but this was such a problem and I had to fix it. Or you could look at it that way, or I could spin it and say, he came here and he had these issues that were repairable, that were fixable, that we were able to go on the other side on for the most part. But through that process, it made us stronger and more attached. And like, we just look at him, and especially that surgery and the recovery of that breathing, that just cemented everything, but just made us a stronger family, which is probably what we needed in that regard.
Yeah.
So
I love that. Thank you so much, Anne, for sharing your story here with us today.
Yeah. And thank you so much for having this platform and sharing everybody's stories. I think that's so beautiful. And then your own journey as well, Laura. I know we can relate on some of the similarities and stuff. So you get it. So I appreciate that.
For sure. And thank you all for listening to the Our Forever Smiles Cleft Mom Diaries and Support podcast. Be sure to subscribe and submit a review of the podcast wherever you listen. I hope that you've enjoyed this audio experience. Maybe you cried a little, laughed a little, but more importantly, I hope that you feel a little piece of reassurance and even joy in your journey. Talk to you next week.